day I stopped to comfort a crying biker on the side of Highway 101, I thought I was just being kind to a stranger having a bad day. I had no idea I was talking to the president of the most feared motorcycle club in California, or that this moment would completely change my understanding of what family really means. My name is Cordelia Martinez, but everyone calls me Cora. I'm 34 years old, and I've been a pediatric nurse at Sacramento Children's Hospital for 8 years. People who know me would probably describe me as the type of person who can't walk past a homeless person without buying them lunch, or drive by a stranded motorist without at least calling for help. My coworkers joke that I'm collecting karma points for the afterlife, but the truth is simpler than that. 6 months before this story takes place, I lost my grandmother Nuela, the woman who raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8 years old. Nuela was barely 5 feet tall, but she had the biggest heart in Sacramento. She used to tell me, "Mija, the world tries to make us hard, but our job is to stay soft where it matters." She believed that kindness was the most powerful force in the universe, and she lived that belief every single day of her life. After Nuela passed, I found myself carrying on her traditions without even realizing it. Every Saturday morning, I drive the same route she used to take to volunteer at the Children's Hospital. I make her famous oatmeal chocolate chip cookies using her handwritten recipe, the one with flower fingerprints still on the index card. I keep a batch in my car because you never know when someone might need a small act of sweetness in their day. This particular Saturday started like any other. October in Northern California is magical, the kind of weather that makes you understand why people pay ridiculous rent to live here. The air was crisp. The sky was that perfect shade of blue that only happens in fall, and golden sunlight was streaming through my Honda Civic's windshield. I had my grandmother's old leather jacket draped over the passenger seat, the same one she wore on her motorcycle before she got too old to ride. I was listening to classic rock, specifically Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond, because it was Nuela's favorite song. She used to crank it up and dance around the kitchen while she cooked Sunday dinner. I was actually singing along, feeling lighter than I had in months, when I saw something that made my heart stop. There, on the shoulder of Highway 101, about 20 miles outside Sacramento, was a sight that didn't compute at first. A massive Harley-Davidson motorcycle was parked beside the guardrail, chrome gleaming in the morning sun. Next to it sat a man who looked like he could bench press my entire car. He was wearing black leather from head to toe, his arms covered in tattoos I couldn't make out from the road. But here's what made me hit my brakes. This giant of a man had his head buried in his hands, and his shoulders were shaking like he was crying. My first instinct was the smart one. Keep driving, mind your own business. Call 911 from a safe distance and let the professionals handle whatever was happening. This man could be dangerous. He could be having a breakdown that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with violence or drugs or any number of things that a small-town pediatric nurse had no business getting involved with. But as I slowed down, getting ready to drive past, I heard my grandmother's voice as clear as if she were sitting in the passenger seat wearing that old leather jacket. Pain recognizes pain, Misha. Sometimes all someone needs is to know they're not invisible. That voice, combined with 8 years of nursing experience that taught me to recognize genuine human suffering when I saw it, made me do something that would change both our lives forever. I pulled over. 6 months had passed since I buried my grandmother Nuela, but the grief still hit me in unexpected waves. That morning, I'd woken up from a dream where she was teaching me to make her famous cookies again, and for just a moment, I'd forgotten she was gone. The emptiness that followed was crushing. Nuela wasn't just my grandmother. She was my entire world after my parents died in that car accident when I was 8. The house felt too quiet without Nuela's humming, without the sound of her slippers shuffling across the kitchen tiles at dawn. So I did what I always did when the silence became unbearable. I threw myself into taking care of other people. At Sacramento Children's Hospital, I'd started picking up extra shifts, staying late to read bedtime stories to kids whose parents couldn't be there. My supervisor, Dr. Helena Vance, kept telling me I needed to take time to process my loss, but work was the only place where my pain felt useful. Around my neck, I wore the small silver cross that Nuela had given me on my 18th birthday. She'd worn it every day for 60 years, through raising 5 children as a single mother, through burying her husband, through taking in a traumatized 8-year-old granddaughter and somehow making her feel safe again. This has seen me through everything, she told me that day. Someday it'll do the same for you. My weekend volunteer shift at the hospital had become sacred to me. Every Saturday, I'd drive the same route Nuela used to take when she volunteered, there in her 70s. I'd pack a container of her oatmeal chocolate chip cookies, made from her recipe, and distribute them to young patients and their exhausted families. The nurses on the pediatric ward had started calling me Cookie Lady, and honestly, it made me feel closer to Nuala than anything else did. This particular Saturday felt heavier than usual. I'd spent the night going through more of Nuela's belongings, finding letters she'd written to me but never sent, filled with advice and encouragement for moments she wouldn't be there to share. My heart was raw, and the direct route to the hospital felt too rushed, too impersonal. I needed time to breathe, to feel connected to something bigger than my grief. Highway 101 through the foothills is one of those drives that reminds you why people fall in love with California. Rolling hills covered in golden grass stretch as far as you can see, dotted with ancient oak trees that have weathered decades of drought and plenty. On clear mornings like this one, you can see the Sierra Nevada mountains in the distance, their peaks still dusted with early snow. I had Neil Diamond playing softly, the same songs Nuala used to sing while she cooked. Sweet Caroline came on, and I found myself smiling for the first time all morning, remembering how she'd grab my hands and make me dance with her in the kitchen, flower in her hair and laughter in her eyes. For just a moment the grief lifted, and I felt grateful instead of empty. That's when I saw him. The contrast was so stark it took my brain a second to process what I was looking at. In the middle of this peaceful, golden California morning, on a stretch of road where the biggest excitement was usually a hawk circling overhead, there was a scene that belonged in a completely different story. The motorcycle was beautiful in that aggressive way that expensive machines are, jet black with chrome details that caught the morning sun like mirrors. But the man beside it was what made me slow down. He had to be at least 6'4", with shoulders that strained against his leather jacket. His arms were covered in tattoos that I couldn't make out from the road, and everything about his appearance screamed danger. But here's what stopped me from driving past. This intimidating giant of a man was crying. Not angry crying, not frustrated crying, but the kind of deep, body-shaking sobs that come from a place of absolute devastation. His head was buried in hands that looked like they could crush walnuts, and his whole body was curved inward like he was trying to disappear. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to keep driving. This wasn't my problem. This could be dangerous. I was a single woman alone on a quiet stretch of highway with a man who looked like he could snap me in half without trying. But something about the pure human pain radiating from this stranger made my foot ease off the gas pedal. In that moment, I swear I could hear my grandmother's voice as clearly as if she were sitting in the passenger seat. Mija, pain doesn't wear a costume. It just hurts. She'd always taught me that the scariest-looking people were often carrying the heaviest burdens, and that kindness was a choice we make despite our fear, not because of its absence. The decision. So I pulled over, my heart hammering against my ribs, and made a choice that would change everything. I parked about 20 feet behind his motorcycle, my hands trembling slightly as I turned off the engine. Up close, the man looked even more intimidating. His leather jacket was worn and weathered, with patches and designs I couldn't quite make out. His boots were massive, steel-toed things that looked like they could kick down doors. Everything about him screamed that I should get back in my car and drive away as fast as possible. I took a deep breath and stepped out of my Honda, my nursing training kicking in despite my fear. "Excuse me," I called softly, approaching slowly, with my hands visible, the same way I'd approach a frightened child in the emergency room. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" My voice sounded smaller than I intended in the open air of the highway. When he looked up at me, I nearly gasped. This wasn't the face of someone angry or dangerous. This was the face of someone completely shattered. His eyes were red and swollen from crying, and there was a rawness there that I recognized immediately from my work at the children's hospital. This was the look parents got when they received the worst possible news about their child. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough and broken. "I don't usually fall apart like this in public." He was trying to compose himself, wiping his face with the back of his hand, but the tears kept coming. "I'm Rex," he said simply, not offering a last name. Despite his size and intimidating appearance, there was something almost childlike in his vulnerability. "I just came from UC Davis Medical Center," Rex continued, his voice cracking. "My daughter Piper, she's 16. She was in a motorcycle accident 3 days ago." He gestured helplessly at his bike. "She was riding with her boyfriend. They hit a patch of gravel on a curve, and she went down hard. Really hard." As a pediatric nurse, I'd seen enough motorcycle accident victims to know how devastating those injuries could be. The way Rex was talking, the hopeless tone in his voice, told me everything I needed to know before he said the words. "The doctors, they're telling me she's brain dead. They want me to sign papers to take her off life support." Rex's massive frame was shaking now, and I could see the weight of guilt crushing him. "I'm the one who taught her to ride," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought I taught her to be safe. I made her wear a helmet, take the safety course, practice in parking lots for months before I'd let her on the street. But it wasn't enough. They're saying she's gone, that the machines are just keeping her body alive. But she's my little girl. She's only 16. She wanted to be a veterinarian, you know. She's been volunteering at animal shelters since she was 12. How do I decide to let her go? How do I sign a paper that says it's okay for my daughter to die?" In that moment, my professional composure cracked completely. I'd held the hands of dozens of parents facing similar decisions, but I'd never been on the receiving end of this kind of raw desperation from a stranger on the side of the road. This wasn't a controlled hospital environment with social workers and chaplains and support systems. This was just a father drowning in the worst moment of his life. Without thinking about the danger, without considering that I was alone on a deserted highway with a man I didn't know, I sat down on the metal guardrail beside him. The contrast was absurd. Me in my grandmother's old cardigan and sensible nursing shoes, him in leather and steel-toed boots. But grief doesn't recognize social boundaries or personal safety protocols. "Tell me about her," I said gently, using the same tone I used with grieving families at the hospital. "Tell me about Piper." And Rex did. For the next 20 minutes, this intimidating stranger poured his heart out to me about a daughter who loved sunflowers and Taylor Swift, who made him watch romantic comedies on movie nights, who had been saving money for veterinary school since she was 14. Her mother died when she was 7, Rex continued, his voice growing steadier as he talked about his daughter. "It's been just me and Piper ever since. I've made a lot of mistakes as a single dad, but she turned out amazing. Anyway, she's kind and smart and funny, and now some doctor I've never met is telling me I have to decide whether she lives or dies." As Rex talked, my nursing experience was processing information automatically. 3 days post-accident, brain death, diagnosis, family struggling with the decision to withdraw life support. I'd seen this scenario play out dozens of times, and I knew the medical reality even if I couldn't bring myself to voice it to this broken father. "The worst part," Rex said, looking directly at me for the first time, "is that I don't know if I'm holding on to hope for her or for me. Am I keeping her on those machines because there's a chance she could come back, or because I'm too much of a coward to let my little girl go?" For the next hour, Rex transformed from an intimidating stranger into a heartbroken father painting vivid pictures of his daughter. "Piper has this thing where she talks to animals like they understand every word," he said, a ghost of a smile crossing his tear-stained face. "She'll spend 20 minutes explaining to our neighbor's cat why it shouldn't hunt birds, complete with hand gestures. The cat actually seems to listen." Rex told me how Piper had decorated his motorcycle helmet with sunflower stickers when she was 12, and how he'd never had the heart to remove them. "My riding buddies gave me grief about it for months." He laughed through his tears. "But every time I put that helmet on, I thought about her smile when she surprised me with it." "She got me hooked on Taylor Swift," Rex admitted, shaking his head in disbelief at his own words. A 52-year-old biker singing along to Love Story because his teenage daughter insisted it was actually really deep, Dad. She made playlists for our rides, mixing country music with pop songs. I pretended to hate it, but I secretly loved hearing her sing along behind me. As Rex talked, I found myself shifting into the role I knew best, supporting a family through impossible circumstances. You know, I said carefully, in my work at the children's hospital, I've sat with a lot of parents facing decisions like yours. The hardest part isn't letting go. It's trusting that you loved her enough to make the right choice, even when every choice feels wrong. The medical reality. I chose my words carefully, drawing on years of experience helping families navigate end-of-life decisions. 3 days is usually enough time for doctors to be certain about brain death, I said gently. They don't make that diagnosis lightly, especially with children. They run multiple tests, bring in specialists, double-check everything. But here's what I've learned, I continued, watching Rex's face carefully. The question isn't whether Piper could come back. The question is what Piper would want if she could tell you herself. What kind of person was she? What did she value? Rex was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. She volunteered at 3 different animal shelters, he said finally. Even worked at the one that handles the hardest cases, the animals that were abused or neglected. She'd come home crying sometimes because she couldn't save them all, but she'd go back the next week anyway. She always said the worst thing you could do to something you love was make it suffer just because you couldn't bear to say goodbye. Rex continued, his voice growing stronger. She made me promise once that if anything ever happened to her, I wouldn't let her become a burden or a tragedy that went on too long. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small tin of cookies I'd made that morning. These were my grandmother's recipe, I said, offering them to Rex. She always said that sharing food was sharing love, and that sometimes a small kindness could carry someone through their darkest hour. Rex took a cookie with his massive hands, and for a moment, the absurdity of the situation hit me. Here I was, sharing homemade cookies with a leather-clad biker on the side of Highway 101, talking about life and death like we'd known each other for years. My grandmother raised me after my parents died, I told him. She taught me that the people we love never really leave us. They become part of how we see the world, part of how we treat other people. Piper's kindness, her love for animals, her ability to make you listen to Taylor Swift, that's not going anywhere. Before I could second-guess myself, I reached up and unclasped my grandmother's silver cross necklace. This belonged to my grandmother Nuela, I said, pressing it into Rex's enormous hands. She wore it through every hard thing in her life. She always said it brought her peace in dark moments. Not because it was magic, but because it reminded her that love is stronger than loss. I can't take this, Rex protested, trying to hand it back. This obviously means everything to you. That's exactly why you should take it, I said firmly. Piper might like having it with her, and maybe, when you're ready, it'll remind you that she's still with you in all the ways that matter. Rex closed his fingers around the necklace, and I could see something shift in his expression. Not acceptance exactly, but a kind of quiet strength. How do I possibly repay this? He asked. You stopped for a complete stranger, listened to me fall apart, and now you're giving me something precious. Just remember this moment, I said, standing up and brushing dust off my jeans. Remember that strangers can surprise you with kindness. Maybe someday you'll be the one stopping to help someone who needs it. I pulled out one of my business cards from the hospital and wrote my personal cell phone number on the back. If you need someone to talk to who understands the medical side of things, or if you just need to talk about Piper, call me, I said. Grief shouldn't be carried alone. As I walked back to my car, I turned back once to see Rex still sitting there, holding my grandmother's necklace up to catch the morning light. Something told me this wasn't really goodbye. 3 weeks later, I was in the middle of my shift at Sacramento Children's Hospital when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me step into the hallway and pick up. Cora? The voice was familiar, but different, steadier somehow. It was Rex. I wanted to thank you, he said. and I could hear something in his voice that hadn't been there that day on the highway. Not happiness exactly, but a kind of peace. Piper passed 4 days after we met. I was able to let her go because of what you said about trusting the love behind the choice. But that's not why I'm calling, Rex continued. I need to ask you something important. Are you free this Saturday afternoon? There's something I want to show you, someone I want you to meet. It's important, Cora. More important than I can explain over the phone. The address Rex gave me led to the outskirts of Modesto, to what looked like a massive outdoor festival. As I pulled into the dusty field that served as a parking lot, my Honda Civic looked completely out of place among the dozens of motorcycles gleaming in the afternoon sun. Harleys, Indians, custom choppers, bikes worth more than most people's houses, all lined up in perfect rows. The noise hit me first. The rumble of engines, classic rock music blasting from speakers, the sound of hundreds of people talking and laughing. Then came the sights that made my brain struggle to process what I was seeing. Families everywhere. Children running between the motorcycles while their leather-clad parents chatted nearby. Elderly couples sitting on lawn chairs, the men in club colors, the women in matching t-shirts. A massive banner stretched between 2 oak trees read, Piper's Ride, 3rd Annual Memorial Charity Event, benefiting Children's Hospital and Animal Rescue Organizations. My heart stopped. This wasn't just any gathering. This was something built around the memory of the girl whose father I'd comforted on the side of the highway. Rex appeared beside my car before I'd even fully processed where I was. He looked different in the daylight, surrounded by his community. Still massive, still intimidating, but there was a confidence here that hadn't existed that broken morning on Highway 101. And his leather vest, which I could now see clearly, told a story I hadn't understood before. Hell's Angels MC was embroidered across the back in bold letters. President was stitched on the front, along with various patches and insignia that marked him as a leader, not just a member. I'd spent an hour comforting the president of one of the most notorious motorcycle clubs in America, and I'd had no idea. You saved my life that day, Rex said, leading me through the crowd of bikers and families. After Piper died, I was planning to follow her. I had it all figured out. But you showed me something I'd forgotten in my grief. You showed me that kindness still exists, that strangers can care about each other, that maybe there was still a reason to keep going. Rex guided me to the center of the gathering, where a beautiful memorial had been set up. Sunflowers everywhere, just like Piper would have loved. Photos of a beautiful teenage girl with her father's eyes and a smile that could light up the world. A scholarship fund announcement for students pursuing veterinary medicine. Information about animal rescue organizations that received donations in her memory. At the heart of the memorial stood a glass display case, and inside it, catching the afternoon sunlight, was my grandmother's silver cross necklace. She was buried with a replica, Rex explained, his voice thick with emotion. But this one, your grandmother's, this stays here to remind everyone that love shows up in the most unexpected places. You see all these people? Rex gestured to the crowd. Around us. Everyone thinks we're dangerous, that we're criminals and thugs. And sure, some clubs give the rest of us a bad reputation. But this club? We escort abused children to court so they don't have to face their attackers alone. We raise money for children's hospitals. We organize charity rides for families who can't afford medical treatment. Rex's voice grew stronger as he spoke. Brothers, sisters, family, he called out to the crowd. I want you to meet someone special. This is Cora Martinez, the angel who stopped to help when I needed it most. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People approached from all directions, wanting to shake my hand, to thank me for helping their president through his darkest moment. Children ran up to hug my legs. Elderly women pressed homemade cookies into my hands. I was surrounded by a sea of leather and denim and genuine warmth. Standing there, surrounded by people who looked nothing like the community I knew, but who were treating me like family, I realized how wrong I'd been about everything. These weren't the dangerous criminals I'd imagined when I first saw Rex on that highway. These were parents and grandparents, people who worked regular jobs and loved their families and happened to find their community on 2 wheels instead of in traditional places. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself completely immersed in this world I never knew existed. Rex introduced me to Maria, a grandmother who ran a bakery and organized food drives for homeless veterans. I met David, a construction worker who spent his weekends teaching motorcycle safety courses to teenagers. There was Patricia, a retired teacher whose bike was decorated with patches from every children's charity ride she'd participated in over the past 15 years. Each person I met had a story that shattered every assumption I'd had about motorcycle clubs. These weren't dangerous outlaws living on the margins of society. These were community members, parents, professionals who found their family in an unexpected place. They told me about escorting funeral processions for fallen soldiers, about organizing toy drives every Christmas, about showing up whenever someone in their extended community needed help. Rex led me to a small stage where a young woman was speaking about the Piper Martinez Memorial Scholarship for aspiring veterinarians. This year, we're able to offer 5 full scholarships to students who demonstrate both academic excellence and a commitment to animal welfare, she announced. The crowd erupted in applause, and I watched Rex wipe away tears as he listened to his daughter's legacy being honored. "Cora," Rex said, approaching me as the formal presentations ended, "I know this might seem crazy, but we'd love for you to be part of our family. Not as a member, obviously, but as what we call an honorary angel. You'd be welcome at every gathering, every charity event, every ride where we need someone with medical training." Before I could respond, Patricia approached carrying a leather jacket that had been custom-made in my size. "We had this made for you," she said with a warm smile. The jacket was beautiful, high-quality leather with a patch on the back that read, "Honorary Angel, Sacramento Chapter." On the front was a small medical cross and my name embroidered in elegant script. I stared at the jacket, overwhelmed by the generosity and acceptance from people who barely knew me. "I don't know what to say," I managed, my voice catching. 3 weeks ago, I thought I was just stopping to help a stranger having a bad day. That's the thing about kindness," Rex said, helping me slip on the jacket. "You never know where it's going to lead. That day you stopped for me, you weren't just helping one person. You were helping everyone who would benefit from the fact that I decided to keep living. Every charity event we organize, every kid we help, every family we support, that all exists because you cared enough to pull over." 6 months later, I found myself on the back of Rex's Harley, participating in my first charity ride. My medical training had indeed come in handy, helping with everything from scraped knees at family events to more serious emergencies during long rides. The patch on my jacket had been joined by others: Ride for Veterans, Toys for Tots, Children's Hospital Supporter. The Silver Cross still sits in its place of honor at Piper's Memorial, but Rex had a replica made for me, identical to the one he'd had made for his daughter's burial. "Nuela's cross brought peace to 3 generations now," he told me when he gave it to me. "That seems like exactly what she would have wanted." What started as a moment of compassion on a lonely highway had grown into something I never could have imagined. I had found a second family in the most unlikely place, surrounded by people who looked nothing like me, but who shared my belief that kindness and community matter more than appearances. My grandmother Nuela always taught me that the world tries to make us hard, but our job is to stay soft where it matters. What I learned from Rex and his motorcycle family is that sometimes the hardest-looking people have the softest hearts. Grief doesn't discriminate, love doesn't judge, and family isn't always what you expect it to be. Every Saturday when I drive to my volunteer shift at the hospital, I take the same route past that spot on Highway 101 where I first met Rex. Sometimes I see other people broken down on the side of the road, and I always stop. Because now I know that you never know whose life you might be about to change, including your own. I thought I was stopping to comfort a crying biker that morning, but really, I was stopping to discover that strangers can become family, that kindness multiplies in ways we never expect, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply refuse to drive past someone in pain. The next time you see someone who needs help, remember Piper's story. Remember that one act of kindness can create ripples that last for generations. And remember that love shows up in the most unexpected places, wearing the most surprising faces. If If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the unexpected connections that change our lives. Because every time you share kindness with a stranger, you never know what beautiful story you might be starting.